Kodiak Island. Just the name conjures images of endless forests, icy waters, and a wild, untamed land at the edge of the world. But beneath the beauty and silence, something else lurks. Out here in the small towns scattered along the coast, people whisper about things that move in the shadows, about friends who vanish without a trace, ancient secrets buried in the woods, and eyes watching from beneath the frozen lakes. These aren't just campfire stories. These are the true accounts of people who have seen the darkness for themselves, who have felt the cold breath of something inhuman on their necks. Tonight, you'll hear 4 of the most disturbing, bone-chilling tales ever to come out of Kodiak Island. Stories that will make you question what's real and what's waiting for you when the lights go out. So turn down the lights, listen closely, and remember, on Kodiak Island, some nightmares are all too real. Stay with us if you dare. I never believed in the stories about Deadman's Cove. Growing up in Kodiak, you hear all kinds of wild tales, ghost ships, haunted forests, even whispers of things that crawl out of the sea at night. But Deadman's Cove was just a stretch of rocky beach, tucked away from the main road where the waves crashed so hard you could barely hear yourself think. It was the kind of place you'd go to skip school, drink cheap beer, and watch the fog roll in. Nothing more. At least that's what I thought, until the night my best friend Tyler vanished without a trace. It was late September, the kind of night when the wind howls through the spruce trees and the air smells like salt and rain. Tyler and I had just started our senior year, and we were itching for something to break the monotony. He'd heard from his older brother about a hidden cave at the far end of the cove, only accessible at low tide. Supposedly, it was where smugglers used to stash their loot back in the day. Tyler was obsessed with the idea of finding it. "Come on, man," he said, grinning as he tossed a flashlight into his backpack. "What's the worst that could happen?" I should have known better, but I was 17, bored, and convinced nothing bad ever really happened in our sleepy little town. So I agreed. We set out just after midnight, cutting through the woods behind Tyler's house. The moon was a thin sliver, barely enough to light our way. The trees creaked and groaned in the wind, and every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, probably just a deer, I told myself, or maybe a fox, but the feeling of being watched never quite left me. When we finally reached the cove, the tide was out, exposing a stretch of slick, seaweed-covered rocks. The waves crashed farther out, sending up bursts of cold spray. Tyler led the way, his flashlight beam dancing over the stones. "There," he said, pointing to a dark opening at the base of the cliff. "That's gotta be it." We scrambled over the rocks, slipping and cursing as we went. The cave was smaller than I expected, just a narrow slit in the stone, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through. Inside, it was pitch black, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting seaweed. Tyler's flashlight flickered as we made our way deeper. The walls were slick with moisture and the floor sloped downward, leading us farther from the sound of the waves. I tried to keep track of how far we'd gone, but it was impossible. The darkness pressed in on all sides, and every sound seemed amplified: the drip of water, the scuttle of something small and unseen. "Dude, check this out," Tyler whispered, shining his light on a patch of wall. Someone had carved symbols into the stone, strange, looping shapes that didn't look like any language I'd ever seen. Some of them were filled in with what looked like dried blood. I shivered. "Let's get out of here, man. This place gives me the creeps." But Tyler just laughed. "Don't be such a wuss. We're almost there." He pressed on and I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. The tunnel twisted and turned, growing narrower with each step. At one point, I had to turn sideways just to squeeze through. The air grew colder and I could hear something, a low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat echoing through the stone. We rounded a final bend, and the tunnel opened into a small chamber. In the center was a pile of old, rotting crates, half buried in sand. Tyler whooped in triumph, rushing forward to pry one open. "See, I told you there'd be something down here." But as he lifted the lid, a wave of stench hit us, so strong I nearly gagged. Inside was a jumble of bones, tangled with scraps of clothing and rusted metal. Human bones. Tyler stumbled back, his face pale. What the hell? That's when we heard it, a scraping sound coming from the tunnel behind us. Slow, deliberate, like something dragging itself across the stone. We froze, listening. The sound grew louder, closer. Tyler swung his flashlight toward the entrance, but the beam flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. "Run," I whispered, grabbing his arm. We bolted for the tunnel, tripping over rocks and bones. The scraping sound followed, faster now, echoing off the walls. I could feel something behind us, something cold and wet, reaching for my ankles. We burst out of the cave, gasping for air. The tide had come in, covering the rocks. The only way back was through waist-deep, freezing water. Tyler didn't hesitate. He plunged in, splashing toward the shore. I followed, my legs numb with cold. Behind us, I heard a guttural, inhuman growl, a sound that still haunts my dreams. We made it to the beach, collapsing in the sand. For a moment, I thought we were safe. But when I looked up, Tyler was gone. One second, he was right beside me. The next, he'd vanished. No splash, no scream, nothing. Just empty sand and the sound of the waves. I searched for him for hours, calling his name until my voice was raw. But he was gone, swallowed by the cove. The police said he must have drowned, swept out to sea by the tide. But I know what I saw. I know something followed us out of that cave, something that took Tyler and left me with nothing but nightmares. I haven't been back to Deadman's Cove since that night. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I hear that scraping sound outside my window, and I wonder if whatever lives in that cave is still looking for me. After that night, nothing in my life was the same. I tried to tell myself it was just the shock, the trauma of losing my best friend. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Something had followed us out of that cave, something that wasn't finished with me yet. The days after Tyler disappeared were a blur. The police combed the cove, dragging the water and searching the rocks. They found nothing. No body, no clothes, not even a shoe. His parents put up flyers all over town, but everyone knew it was hopeless. People whispered about the cove, about the stories we'd all heard as kids, but nobody wanted to say it out loud, that Deadman's Cove had claimed another victim. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that darkness, felt that cold, wet hand reaching for me. I heard the scraping, the guttural growl. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows that moved when nothing else did, shapes that didn't belong. My mom thought I was losing it. Maybe I was. A week after Tyler vanished, I found something strange on my windowsill. It was a small, smooth stone, slick with salt water, with one of those weird symbols carved into it, the same kind we'd seen in the cave. I tried to throw it away, but the next morning it was back. This time, there was a wet footprint on the floor beneath my window, as if someone, or something, had climbed up from the beach in the middle of the night. I started locking my window, but it didn't matter. Every night, I'd hear that scraping sound, growing louder and closer. Sometimes, I'd wake up to find my sheets damp, smelling of seaweed and rot. I tried to tell my mom, but she just looked at me with pity in her eyes. She thought I was grieving, maybe even losing my mind. But I knew the truth. I knew Tyler was still out there, somewhere, and whatever had taken him wanted me next. One night, about 2 weeks after it all started, I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard my name, soft, desperate, like someone calling from far away. "Help me." It was Tyler's voice. I sat up, heart pounding, and saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was him, or at least it looked like him. But his skin was pale and bloated, his eyes black and empty. Seaweed clung to his hair, and water dripped from his clothes, pooling on the floor. "Help me," he whispered again, reaching out with a trembling hand. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. All I could do was stare as he stepped closer, his mouth opening wider and wider until it was nothing but a gaping black hole. Suddenly, he lunged at me, and everything went dark. When I woke up, it was morning. My room was empty, but the sheets were soaked, and the stone with the symbol was lying on my chest. I knew then that I couldn't stay. If I did, whatever haunted Deadman's Cove would come for me, just like it had come for Tyler. I packed a bag and left town that afternoon. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just got on the first ferry off the island and never looked back. But even now, years later, I can't escape what happened. I still dream about the cave, about the bones and the symbols and the thing that lives in the darkness. Sometimes, I wake up to find my sheets damp and the smell of salt water in the air. And every so often, I find a stone on my windowsill, carved with that same twisted symbol. I don't know what it wants from me. Maybe it's a warning, maybe it's a promise. All I know is, if you ever find yourself on Kodiak Island, stay far away from Deadman's Cove. Some places are better left alone. Some things are better left buried. And some friends you never really lose, not completely. If you've ever spent a night in the deep woods of Kodiak Island, you know there's a certain kind of silence that settles in after dark. It's not peaceful, not really. It's heavy, like the trees are holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I used to think it was just my imagination, but after what happened to me and my cousin, I know better. I grew up in a small fishing village on the island, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. My cousin, Jamie, was a year older than me and always up for an adventure. We'd spent our childhood exploring the forests, building forts and daring each other to go deeper and deeper into the wild. But there was one patch of woods we never touched, the old-growth forest north of town, where the trees grew so thick you could barely see the sky. People called it the Silent Stand. The elders said it was cursed, that strange things happened there. Animals went missing. Hunters got lost, even in broad daylight. Sometimes at night, you'd hear drumming or chanting drifting through the trees, even though nobody lived out that way. Most folks just avoided it, but Jamie wanted to see for himself. It was late October, just before Halloween, when he finally talked me into it. We were 16, bored and convinced we were invincible. Jamie had heard about an old logging road that cut through the Silent Stand, and he wanted to camp out there for a night, just to prove the stories were nothing but superstition. I remember the sky was already darkening when we set out, our backpacks loaded with snacks, a couple of flashlights and Jamie's old hunting knife. The air was cold and damp, and the wind rattled the branches overhead. I tried to laugh off my nerves, but the deeper we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, not even the distant hum of the ocean. Just the crunch of our boots on the mossy ground. We found the logging road easily enough, a narrow, overgrown path winding between ancient spruce and hemlock. The trees here were massive, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their roots snaking across the ground like the fingers of something buried alive. Jamie was in his element, cracking jokes and shining his flashlight into the shadows, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We hiked for about an hour before we found a clearing big enough to set up camp. The ground was soft and spongy, covered in a thick layer of moss. We pitched our tent, built a small fire, and settled in for the night. Jamie told stories, some funny, some scary, all of them louder than they needed to be. I think he was trying to drown out the silence. Around midnight, the fire started to die down, and Jamie decided to go look for more wood. I offered to go with him, but he just grinned and told me not to be a chicken. I watched his flashlight bob away into the trees, the beam growing fainter and fainter until it disappeared completely. That's when I heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping, like a drumbeat echoing through the woods. At first, I thought it was just my heart pounding in my ears, but then it grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to come from all around me, bouncing off the trees in a way that made it impossible to tell where it was coming from. I called out for Jamie, but there was no answer. The drumming got faster, more frantic, and I started to feel dizzy, like the ground was shifting beneath me. The shadows between the trees seemed to move, twisting and writhing like living things. Suddenly, Jamie burst back into the clearing, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. He was out of breath, clutching his side like he'd been running for miles. "We have to go," he gasped. "Now." I didn't argue. We grabbed our stuff and took off down the logging road, the drumming chasing us through the trees. The woods seemed to close in around us, the branches reaching out like claws. I could hear something moving in the darkness, heavy footsteps, snapping twigs, the sound of something big and angry. We ran until our legs gave out, collapsing in a heap on the side of the road. The drumming had stopped, but the silence was even worse. I could hear Jamie sobbing quietly, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I saw something," he whispered. "In the trees, it wasn't human." I wanted to ask what he meant, but I was too scared to speak. We sat there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, too afraid to go back. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of birds singing. The sun was rising and the woods looked almost normal in the daylight. But Jamie was gone. At first, I thought he'd just gone to find help or maybe to clear his head. But as the hours passed and he didn't come back, panic set in. I searched the woods, calling his name until my voice was hoarse. I found his backpack, torn open and scattered across the moss, but no sign of Jamie. I stumbled back to town in a daze, half mad with fear and exhaustion. The search parties combed the woods for days, but they never found him. The only thing they did find was a circle of stones deep in the silent stand, each one carved with strange symbols, just like the ones I'd seen in my nightmares. People said Jamie must have gotten lost, maybe fallen into a ravine or been taken by a bear. But I know what I heard that night. I know what I saw in the shadows. The woods came alive, and they took him. I haven't set foot in the silent stand since, but sometimes late at night, I hear that drumming again, echoing through the trees. And I wonder if Jamie is still out there, lost in the darkness, waiting for someone to find him. After Jamie disappeared, my life split in two. There was the part everyone could see, the kid who'd lost his cousin in the woods, who walked around town with hollow eyes and barely spoke. And then there was the part I kept hidden, the part that woke up every night drenched in sweat, heart pounding, ears straining for the sound of that impossible drumming. The search for Jamie lasted a week. My dad and I joined the others, combing the silent stand with flashlights and dogs, calling his name until our voices cracked. The woods felt different in the daylight, less menacing, almost peaceful, but I could never shake the feeling that we were being watched. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting between the trees, but when I turned, there was nothing there. On the last day of the search, I found something that still haunts me. We were deep in the forest, farther than I'd ever been, when I stumbled across a patch of ground where the moss had been scraped away. In the center was a circle of stones, each one carved with those same strange symbols. The air was thick and heavy, and the silence pressed in on me like a weight. I knelt down, running my fingers over the carvings, and felt a jolt of cold shoot up my arm. That night the dream started. In my dreams, I was back in the woods, running through the darkness as the drumming grew louder and louder. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches reaching for me, their roots pulling at my feet. Sometimes I'd see Jamie ahead of me, his face pale and eyes wide with terror, but no matter how fast I ran, I could never catch up. And always, just before I woke up, I'd see something else, something huge and shadowy, with antlers like a stag and eyes that glowed in the darkness. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that the stress and guilt were making me see things that weren't there. But the dreams didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. I started seeing things when I was awake, two shapes moving in the corners of my vision, flashes of white in the trees. Once, I woke up to find muddy footprints on my bedroom floor, leading from the window to my bed. My parents worried about me, but what could they do? The town had already written Jamie off as another lost kid, another name to add to the list of people who'd vanished in the silent stand. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to believe that something was wrong with those woods. But I couldn't let it go. I started spending my afternoons at the library, digging through old newspapers and town records, looking for anything that might explain what had happened. The deeper I dug, the more I found. Stories of hunters who'd gone missing, of strange lights and sounds in the forest, of people who'd come back from the woods changed, their eyes hollow and their memories full of holes. One story in particular stuck with me. It was from the 1950s about a group of loggers who'd set up camp in the silent stand. According to the article, they'd started hearing drumming at night, and one by one they'd disappeared. The last man left behind a journal filled with frantic scribbles about the old ones and the watchers in the trees. The final entry read, "The woods are awake. They want us gone." I started to wonder if Jamie was really gone, or if he was still out there, trapped in the same nightmare I kept reliving. One night, about a month after Jamie vanished, I woke up to the sound of drumming. It was faint at first, barely more than a whisper, but it grew louder and more insistent, echoing through the house. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and saw a pale shape standing outside my window. It was Jamie. He looked just like he had the night he disappeared. Same clothes, same wild, terrified eyes. He pressed his hand against the glass, his mouth moving soundlessly, and I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. I stumbled out of bed and ran to the window, but by the time I got there, he was gone. All that was left was a muddy handprint on the glass and the faint echo of drumming fading into the night. I knew then that I had to go back. I had to find him, or at least find out what had happened. I packed a bag with a flashlight, a knife, and a notebook, and waited until my parents were asleep. Then I slipped out of the house and made my way to the edge of the silent stand. The woods were even darker than I remembered, the trees looming overhead like ancient sentinels. The air was thick with fog, and every step felt like it was taking me deeper into another world. I followed the old logging road, my flashlight barely piercing the gloom, the drumming growing louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I found the circle of stones again. The symbols seemed to writhe and twist in the beam of my flashlight, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. I knelt in the center of the circle and closed my eyes, listening to the drumming. That's when I heard Jamie's voice. He was calling my name, his voice thin and desperate, echoing through the trees. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the sound, branches whipping at my face, roots grabbing at my ankles. The drumming grew frantic, almost angry, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I burst into a small clearing and saw Jamie standing in the center, his eyes wide with fear. He reached out to me, but before I could move, something huge and shadowy rose up behind him, antlers like a stag, eyes burning with cold, inhuman light. I froze, unable to move or speak. The creature leaned down, its face inches from Jamie's, and whispered something in a language I couldn't understand. Jamie screamed, a sound that still chills me to the bone, and the creature melted back into the shadows, taking him with it. I collapsed to the ground, sobbing and shaking, the drumming fading into silence. When I finally looked up, the clearing was empty. Jamie was gone. I stumbled out of the woods at dawn, my clothes torn and my hands covered in blood. I don't remember how I got home. My parents found me on the porch, shivering and half mad with fear. I tried to tell them what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was draw the symbols I'd seen on the stones, over and over, until my fingers cramped. It's been years since that night, but I still dream about the woods. I still hear the drumming, still see Jamie's face in the shadows. Sometimes, I wake up to find muddy footprints on my floor or a handprint on my window. I know the woods are still out there waiting. I know they're awake. And I know one day they'll come for me too. If you ever visit Kodiak Island, you'll see the old lighthouse standing alone on the rocky point, battered by wind and salt, its white paint peeling and its windows always dark. Most people just drive by, maybe snap a photo and move on. But for me, that lighthouse is a scar on the landscape, a reminder of a secret I've carried for most of my life, a secret that still keeps me up at night. I was 19 when I took the job as assistant keeper at the Kodiak Lighthouse. It was the summer after my first year of college, and I was desperate for money and a little adventure. The ad in the paper said room and board included, and the pay was better than anything else I could find. My parents thought I was crazy, but I figured it would be a quiet summer, just me, the sea, and the old man who'd been keeper for nearly 30 years. His name was Mr. Harlan. He was a wiry, weather-beaten guy in his 60s, with a thick beard and eyes that seemed to look right through you. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice was rough as gravel. The first thing he told me as we climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room was this: never go outside after dark, and never, ever open the basement door. I laughed, thinking he was just trying to scare the new kid, but he didn't smile. He just handed me a ring of heavy iron keys and told me to get settled. The first few weeks were uneventful. My days were spent cleaning the glass, polishing the brass, and keeping the logbook up to date. At night, I'd sit in the lantern room, watching the beam sweep across the black water, listening to the wind howl around the tower. Sometimes I'd see fishing boats out on the horizon, their lights bobbing in the darkness. Other times I'd hear strange noises, scraping, tapping, even what sounded like whispering, but I told myself it was just the wind. Mr. Harlan kept to himself, spending most of his time in his quarters or out on the rocks, staring at the sea. He was strict about the rules, especially the one about the basement. The door was thick and old, with a heavy iron lock. I never saw him go down there, but sometimes, late at night, I'd hear footsteps on the stairs and the faint sound of something moving below. One evening, about a month into the job, a storm rolled in off the Pacific. The wind was so strong it rattled the windows, and the rain came down in sheets. The power flickered, and for a few minutes, the only light was the beam from the lantern room, sweeping over the churning waves. I was on duty that night, keeping an eye on the logbook and making sure the light stayed lit. Mr. Harlan was nowhere to be seen. Around midnight, I heard a loud crash from downstairs, followed by a low, guttural moan. My heart started pounding. I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the spiral stairs, calling out for Mr. Harlan. No answer. The sound came again, louder this time, a scraping, dragging noise like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I followed it to the basement door. The lock was hanging open, the door slightly ajar. I hesitated, remembering Mr. Harlan's warning, but curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open and shined my light down the narrow stone steps. The air was cold and damp, and the smell of salt and mildew was overwhelming. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw Mr. Harlan, kneeling in front of a large, iron-bound chest. He was muttering to himself, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the lock. "Mr. Harlan," I called, my voice barely more than a whisper. He spun around, his eyes wild. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed. "Get out now." Before I could move, there was a loud bang from outside, followed by the sound of something heavy slamming against the lighthouse wall. The whole building shook. Mr. Harlan scrambled to his feet, shoving me back up the stairs. "Go to your room and lock the door," he ordered. "Don't come out until morning." I did as I was told, heart racing. I locked my door and sat on the bed, listening to the storm rage outside. Every so often, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway or the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Once, I thought I heard Mr. Harlan chanting in a language I didn't recognize. I barely slept that night. When I finally ventured out in the morning, the lighthouse was eerily quiet. Mr. Harlan was in the kitchen, his face pale and drawn. He didn't say a word about what had happened, and I didn't dare ask. But from that night on, things started to change. I began to notice strange things around the lighthouse. Wet footprints on the stairs, even when it hadn't rained. The sound of whispering coming from the basement, even when the door was locked. And sometimes, late at night, the beam of the lighthouse would flicker and dim, as if something was passing in front of it. One morning, I found a dead gull on the doorstep, its eyes missing and its wings twisted at unnatural angles. Another time, I woke up to find seaweed tangled in my bedsheets, even though my window was closed and I hadn't been outside. I tried to talk to Mr. Harlan about it, but he just shook his head. "Some things are better left alone," he said. "Just do your job and stay out of the basement." But I couldn't let it go. The more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. The whispering grew louder, the shadows darker. I started having nightmares, dreams of drowning, of cold hands dragging me down into the black water, of something ancient and hungry lurking beneath the waves. One night I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my door. I held my breath, listening as they stopped just outside. There was a long pause, then a soft, wet thump, like something heavy being dropped on the floor. I waited, heart pounding, until the footsteps moved away. The next morning, I found a trail of water leading from my door to the basement stairs. At the bottom, the basement door was open again, the lock broken. I crept down the stairs, flashlight trembling in my hand. The chest was gone. In its place was a dark, wet stain on the floor, and the faint sound of whispering echoing from the shadows. I ran back upstairs, slamming the door behind me. Mr. Harlan was waiting in the kitchen, his face grim. "It's out," he said quietly, "and now we have to pay the price." I wanted to ask what he meant, but he just shook his head and walked away. That was the beginning of the end. After that morning, the lighthouse felt different, like the air itself was heavier, thick with something I couldn't see but could feel pressing in on me. Mr. Harlan barely spoke. He moved through the halls like a ghost, eyes darting to every shadow, flinching at every sound. I tried to keep busy, but the routine that once felt comforting now seemed pointless. The light still swept the sea, but it felt like we were the ones being watched. The nights were the worst. The whispering from the basement grew louder, sometimes rising to a chorus of voices that seemed to seep through the floorboards and into my dreams. I'd wake up gasping, convinced I was drowning, the taste of salt water in my mouth. Sometimes I'd find my bedsheets damp or my clothes smelling of brine. Once I woke to find a single, pale fish scale stuck to my cheek. I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I saw and heard. It was the only thing that kept me sane. I wrote about the dead gulls that kept appearing on the doorstep, their bodies twisted and broken. I wrote about the strange lights I sometimes saw out on the water, pale, flickering orbs that danced just beyond the reach of the lighthouse beam. I wrote about the dreams and about Mr. Harlan's growing fear. One night, I found him in the lantern room, staring out at the sea. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, his hands trembling as he gripped the railing. "It's my fault," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could keep it locked away. I thought the old ways would hold, but it's stronger now, hungry." I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head. "You wouldn't understand. Nobody does, not anymore." He told me the lighthouse was built on old ground, a place the native Alutiiq people once called the place where the sea comes alive. They believed something ancient lived beneath the waves, something that demanded respect and sometimes sacrifice. When the lighthouse was built, the keepers were given a chest, sealed with iron and marked with strange symbols. Their job wasn't just to keep the light burning, but to keep whatever was in the chest locked away. "For a long time it worked," Mr. Harlan said, "but the sea doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive." I wanted to leave, to run back to town and never look back, but something kept me there, a sense of responsibility, maybe, or just plain fear. I started sleeping with my door locked and a heavy chair wedged under the handle. I kept my flashlight and knife within reach at all times, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. A few nights later, the storm came back worse than before. The wind screamed around the tower, and the rain battered the windows so hard I thought they'd shatter. The power went out, plunging the lighthouse into darkness. The only light came from the lantern room, its beam flickering and weak. I heard the basement door slam open, followed by the sound of something dragging itself up the stairs. The whispering was deafening now, 100 voices all speaking at once, their words twisting and writhing in my mind. I grabbed my flashlight and crept into the hallway. The air was freezing and the walls were slick with moisture. I could see wet footprints leading from the basement to the lantern room, bare, human-shaped, but far too large. I followed them up the spiral stairs, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. At the top, I found Mr. Harlan standing by the window, his back to me. The lantern's beam flickered, casting long, twisted shadows across the room. He turned to face me, and I saw that his eyes were black, like the depths of the ocean. His skin was pale and clammy, and his mouth twisted into a grimace of pain. "It wants you," he said, his voice echoing with a dozen others. "It's always hungry, always waiting." Before I could move, the window shattered, and a wave of icy water crashed into the room. I was thrown to the floor, choking and sputtering as the water closed over my head. I felt something wrap around my ankle, cold, slimy, impossibly strong. I kicked and clawed, desperate for air, but the grip only tightened. Through the swirling water, I saw shapes moving, pale, bloated figures with empty eyes and mouths stretched wide in silent screams. They reached for me, their fingers long and webbed, their skin covered in barnacles and seaweed. I thought I was going to die. I thought I'd be dragged down into the blackness, lost forever. But then, just as suddenly as it began, the water receded. I found myself lying on the cold, wet floor, gasping for breath. The lantern room was empty. Mr. Harlan was gone. I stumbled down the stairs, slipping on the wet stone. The basement door was wide open, and the chest was back in its place. Only now, the iron bands were broken, and the lid hung open. Inside, I saw nothing but darkness, deeper than anything I'd ever known. I ran outside into the storm and didn't stop until I reached the edge of the cliffs. I looked back at the lighthouse, its beam flickering weakly in the rain. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the lantern room, watching me. Then the light went out and the tower was swallowed by the night. I made it back to town at dawn, soaked and shivering, my mind reeling with what I'd seen. I tried to tell the authorities, but they just shook their heads. The storm had washed out the road, they said. The lighthouse was abandoned. Mr. Harlan was never found. They sent a team to check the tower, but all they found was the empty chest and a trail of wet footprints leading out to the rocks. The lighthouse was sealed off, declared unsafe, and left to rot. But I know the truth. I know what lives beneath the waves, what waits in the darkness for someone to open the door. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I hear the whispering again, calling me back to the lighthouse. Sometimes, I dream of drowning, of cold hands dragging me down into the black. I left Kodiak Island after that summer, but I've never really escaped. The sea is always with me, in my dreams, in the taste of salt on the air, in the shadows that move just out of sight. I know the lighthouse is still there, standing watch over the place where the sea comes alive. And I know one day, someone else will open that door. If you ask anyone from Kodiak Island about the winter of 2017, they'll probably just talk about how cold it was. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and never lets go. The kind of cold that makes the sea freeze in the harbors and the lakes turn to glass. But if you ask me, I'll tell you that winter was when I learned what real fear was. Because that was the year I found out what lives beneath the ice. I was 23, working as a wildlife technician for the state. My job was mostly tracking animal populations, counting deer, checking on bear dens, that sort of thing. It was lonely work, but I liked it. I liked the silence of the woods, the way the snow muffled every sound. I liked being out where nobody could bother me. That winter, I was assigned to monitor a remote lake about 20 miles north of town. Locals called it Devil's Mirror, on account of how still and black the water looked, even in summer. In winter, it froze so solid you could drive a truck across it. The elders said the lake was cursed, that strange things happened there. I'd always thought it was just a story to keep kids from wandering too far. My first trip out was in early January. The sun barely rose above the horizon and the sky was a flat, endless gray. I loaded up my snowmobile with gear, ice auger, sample jars, a tent, and enough food to last a few days. The plan was to drill through the ice, take some water samples, and check for signs of wildlife. Easy enough. The ride out was uneventful. The forest was silent, the trees heavy with snow. When I reached the lake, I was struck by how empty it felt. No animal tracks, no birds, not even the sound of wind. Just a wide, flat sheet of ice stretching out under the gray sky. I set up camp near the shore, drilled my first hole, and got to work. The ice was thick, almost 2 feet, but the water beneath was black and still. I dropped a camera down, hoping to catch a glimpse of fish or maybe a curious otter, but all I saw was darkness. That night, as I sat in my tent, I heard a sound I'll never forget. It started as a low groan, like the ice shifting under its own weight, but then it changed, became a rhythmic tapping, like something knocking from below. I turned off my lantern and listened, heart pounding. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, moving across the lake toward my camp. I told myself it was just the ice settling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was down there, moving beneath my feet. The next morning, I found strange marks near the hole I'd drilled. At first, I thought they were just cracks in the ice, but when I looked closer, I saw they were 2 regular, almost like claw marks, radiating out from the hole in a perfect circle. I took photos, made notes, and tried to laugh it off. Maybe a wolverine had come by in the night, curious about the smell of fish on my gear. But that night the tapping came back, louder this time, closer. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling of my tent, listening as the sound circled my camp. Sometimes it would stop right beneath me, and I'd feel a faint vibration, like something huge was moving just below the surface. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't sleep. On the 3rd day, I decided to pack up early. I'd collected enough samples, and the unease was starting to get to me. As I loaded my gear onto the snowmobile, I heard a sharp crack behind me. I spun around just in time to see a section of ice near the center of the lake buckle and split, sending up a spray of black water. Something was moving under the ice, something big. I watched, frozen in place, as a long, pale shape slid just beneath the surface, following the cracks. It was gone in an instant, but I caught a glimpse of something that looked like a hand. Long, thin fingers splayed against the ice, pressing up from below. I didn't wait to see more. I jumped on the snowmobile and tore out of there, not stopping until I was back in town. I tried to tell my supervisor what I'd seen, but he just laughed. "Probably a seal," he said. "Or maybe you've been out in the cold too long." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But that night I dreamed of the lake. I dreamed I was standing on the ice, looking down into the black water. Something was staring back at me, something with eyes like pale coins and a mouth full of needle teeth. It pressed its hand against the ice, and the tapping started again, louder and louder, until I woke up screaming. I tried to put it out of my mind, but the dreams kept coming. Every night I'd see that pale face, those long fingers reaching up from the darkness. Sometimes I'd wake to find my window covered in frost, the glass etched with strange, swirling patterns that looked almost like writing. A week later, I got a call from a local trapper named Pete. He'd been out near Devil's Mirror and found something strange, animal tracks circling the lake, but no sign of the animals themselves. Just the tracks, going round and round, then stopping at the edge of the ice. I agreed to meet him the next morning. The sky was clear, but the cold was even worse than before. We rode out together, Pete's dog team leading the way. When we reached the lake, I saw what he meant. Dozens of tracks, fox, deer, even bear, all circling the lake, then stopping dead at the edge. No blood, no fur, nothing. Just the tracks and then nothing. Pete was a tough old guy, not the type to scare easy, but even he looked uneasy. "Never seen anything like it," he muttered, scanning the ice. "Feels wrong out here." We walked out onto the lake, careful to stay near the shore. The ice was thick, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was thinner than it looked. Every step sent a shiver up my spine. We found more of those claw marks near the holes I'd drilled. Pete knelt down, running his gloved hand over the ice. "Not a wolverine," he said quietly. "Not a bear either. Too big, too human." I wanted to leave, but Pete insisted on checking the center of the lake. "If something's out here, we need to know," he said. We made our way out, the ice groaning beneath our feet. When we reached the spot where I'd seen the crack, Pete knelt down and pressed his ear to the ice. For a long moment there was nothing. Then suddenly his eyes went wide. He scrambled back, face pale. "Something's down there," he whispered. "Something moving." Before I could react, the ice beneath us shuddered. A long, pale arm shot up from the black water, smashing through the ice and grabbing Pete by the leg. He screamed, clawing at the surface as the thing dragged him down. I lunged forward, grabbing his arm, but the ice was slick with water and blood. Pete's eyes met mine, wide with terror, and then he was gone, pulled beneath the ice, the hole closing behind him as if it had never been there. I staggered back, heart pounding, staring at the spot where he'd vanished. The ice was smooth and unbroken, the only sign of what had happened a single, bloody handprint frozen in the surface. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the shore, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind reeling. I knew then that the stories were true. There was something beneath the ice at Devil's Mirror, something that was hungry, something that was waiting. And I had a feeling it wasn't done with me yet. I don't remember much about getting back to town. I must have driven the snowmobile on autopilot, hands shaking so badly I could barely keep it on the trail. When I finally stumbled into the ranger station, I was half frozen and babbling about what I'd seen. They tried to calm me down, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Pete was well known, and when I told them he'd been pulled under the ice by something with a human hand, they looked at me like I'd lost my mind. A search party went out the next morning. They found Pete's sled and his dogs, but no sign of him. The ice was smooth and unbroken, except for a single, bloody handprint near the center of the lake. The official story was that he'd fallen through a weak spot and drowned. But I knew better. I'd seen the thing that took him. I tried to quit my job, but my supervisor convinced me to stay on until they could find a replacement. I spent the next few weeks jumping at every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, pale shapes moving just beyond the reach of the streetlights, long fingers tapping at the glass when the temperature dropped at night. The dreams got worse. I'd wake up gasping, convinced I was back on the ice, staring down into the black water as something stared back at me. Sometimes I'd wake to find my window covered in frost, the same swirling patterns etched into the glass. Once, I found a single, wet footprint on my bedroom floor, leading from the window to my bed. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew the truth. The thing beneath the ice had seen me, and it wasn't going to let me go. A few days after Pete disappeared, I got a call from his wife. She was frantic, convinced he was still alive. She said she'd heard him calling her name at night, his voice muffled and distant like it was coming from underwater. She begged me to go back to the lake, to look for him one more time. I didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away, but I couldn't say no. I owed Pete that much. I packed my gear and headed out at dawn, the sky a pale, washed-out blue. The forest was silent, the snow untouched. When I reached Devil's Mirror, the lake was as still and black as ever, the ice gleaming in the weak sunlight. I walked out onto the ice, every step sending a shiver up my spine. I stopped at the spot where Pete had vanished, the bloody handprint still visible beneath a thin layer of frost. I knelt down and pressed my ear to the ice, listening. At first there was nothing, just the faint groan of the ice shifting under my weight. But then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping like fingers drumming on glass. It grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. I scrambled back, heart pounding. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural moan that seemed to rise up from the depths of the lake. The ice beneath me began to crack, thin lines spiderwebbing out from where I'd been kneeling. I turned to run, but my foot slipped, and I crashed to the surface. The ice gave way beneath me, plunging me into the freezing black water. The cold was like a punch to the gut, stealing the air from my lungs. I kicked and clawed at the ice, desperate to find the hole, but something wrapped around my ankle, long, thin fingers, impossibly strong. I looked down and saw a pale face staring up at me, eyes wide and empty, mouth stretched in a silent scream. It was Pete. Or at least it looked like him. But his skin was gray and bloated, his hair tangled with weeds and ice. He reached for me, his fingers digging into my leg, pulling me down into the darkness. I fought with everything I had, kicking and thrashing, but the grip only tightened. I could feel myself slipping, the cold numbing my limbs, my vision narrowing to a single point of light above me. Then just as suddenly as it began, the grip loosened. I broke the surface, gasping for air, clawing my way onto the ice. I crawled to the shore, coughing and shivering, my mind reeling. I looked back at the lake and saw Pete standing on the ice, his eyes locked on mine. He raised a hand as if to wave, and then he was gone, sucked back beneath the surface, the ice closing over him like a lid. I stumbled back to town, half mad with fear and cold. I tried to tell the others what I'd seen, but nobody believed me. They said I was lucky to be alive, that I must have hallucinated the whole thing. But I knew the truth. The thing beneath the ice had let me go, for now. I left Kodiak Island a week later, taking the first ferry to the mainland. I tried to put it all behind me to start over somewhere new, but the dreams followed me. The tapping at the window, the frost patterns on the glass, the feeling of cold fingers wrapping around my ankle whenever I stepped into a cold shower. A year later, I got a letter from Pete's wife. She said she'd moved away, but sometimes, late at night, she still heard his voice calling to her from the lake. She said she'd seen him in her dreams, standing on the ice, his eyes empty and his mouth open in a silent scream. She wasn't the only one. I started hearing from others, trappers, fishermen, even tourists, who'd seen strange things at Devil's Mirror. Pale shapes moving beneath the ice, claw marks around the edges, voices calling out in the night. Some said they'd seen faces staring up at them from the black water, eyes wide and pleading. The authorities closed the lake to the public, blaming thin ice and dangerous conditions. But the stories kept coming. People kept disappearing. I know the thing beneath the ice is still there, waiting. I know it's hungry, and I know one day it will find a way out. Sometimes when the temperature drops and the world goes silent, I hear the tapping again, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. I see frost patterns on my window, swirling and twisting like writing I can almost read. I don't know what it wants. Maybe it's lonely, maybe it's angry, or maybe it just wants to remind me that I escaped, but only because it let me go. If you ever find yourself on Kodiak Island in the dead of winter, stay away from Devil's Mirror. Don't listen to the tapping. Don't look into the ice. And whatever you do, don't answer when you hear your name called from beneath the surface. Because some things are better left frozen, and some things, once awakened, never go back to sleep. Those were 4 of the most disturbing true horror stories from Kodiak Island's small towns. Tales of vanishing friends, haunted woods, cursed lighthouses, and the thing lurking beneath the ice. Maybe you believe these are just legends, or maybe you felt that cold shiver when the wind howls and the darkness presses in. Out here, the line between myth and reality is razor thin, and sometimes the things we fear most are waiting just beyond the edge of the light. Which story haunted you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories that will keep you up at night.